here to talk about essentially everything FAFSA. But just a little bit before we dive into what that is looking like this year, just want to share a little bit about College Now. We are a college access organization, which pretty much just means our entire job is to help through this entire process. Everything we do is free, so if you have any questions after this presentation, we have an entire team that is available for one-on-one appointments to help you through this entire process, because there can be a lot of different questions that come up. But just kind of starting from the very basics before we dive into the details of the actual financial aid application. When we are looking at the cost of attendance, it's really important to identify your sticker price and your net price. And when I'm talking about cost of attendance, it could be for a 2-year school, 4-year school. It could also be for trade and certificate programs, because some of them do accept federal financial aid, which would require a FAFSA to help pay and subsidize for those programs. But really you're going to look at tuition and fees, which is what you traditionally think of when you're thinking of expenses for your programs. But then you're also looking at room and board, which is if you're living in a dormitory, if you have a meal plan, and then anything that's miscellaneous. So we'll talk about what those miscellaneous expenses might be. But you essentially would then subtract your scholarships and grants that you have been awarded, and then you're looking at your net price. So then that's what the family is expected to come up with in terms of payment for your program. And then often people are using student loans, savings, or income to make up that difference in net price. And what we always recommend is make sure that that net price is something that is very manageable for your family. So that's why it's so important to apply to multiple programs, to kind of compare different financial aid packages. And we can talk a little bit more about that later if you all want as well. But really, it's so important to remember that the sticker price is rarely what you're actually paying for. So if you're looking at a private institution and you see that the tuition is $90,000 a year, you're not necessarily going to be paying $90,000 a year. So that's kind of the whole point of that conversation between sticker price and net price. Net prices tends to be a lot less, but colleges and universities are legally required to have the net price calculator on their websites. So if you want to kind of look at that and do an estimator, you can look at that on their websites, which is a very important part of doing your kind of financial planning when you're looking at beginning your FAFSA process. So I did mention other fees in terms of what is part of this kind of financial planning with your FAFSA stuff. So we talked about tuition and fees. We talked about room and board a little bit. One thing that a lot of individuals forget about are books and supplies. You are responsible for your own books once you get to the collegiate level. Whether it's a 2-year, 4-year trade or certificate program, you are providing the materials that the professors are requesting you to bring to the classroom. So figuring out how to kind of identify payments for those, get free resources, we have lots of tips. And then of course transportation or other personal needs. So all of that is rolled up into kind of that sticker price of the college that is listed. Okay, so now we're going to actually get into some of this financial aid stuff, which is why I would assume all of you are here. But it is, some of it is free, some of it is not free, so which means essentially some of it you don't have to pay back and some of it you do. All of it is supporting an educational program, right? The focus has to be for an educational program. We always talk about there's 3 main types that are initiated from the FAFSA application. You have your gift money, which is the money that everybody wants, your grants and scholarships. And essentially a grant is something that the federal government or the state of Ohio says this is something that you are qualified for, typically need-based. And then scholarships are typically merit-based. So 2 forms of money that you don't have to pay back. Then you have earned money, which is typically federal work study. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then finally, borrowed money, which is loans. And that's everything that everyone is always kind of dreading, but we'll talk through how some loans can be really good. So I already chatted about grants and scholarships. The most common grant that is initiated from the FAFSA is the Pell Grant that's dedicated directly from the federal government. We do also have some grants that are specific to the state of Ohio, which the institutions will kind of initiate for you, but only if you've completed a FAFSA. Similarly with scholarships, they're merit-based, they require separate applications, but almost every single scholarship application requires that you have a FAFSA on file. So your financial aid kind of gateway really is that FAFSA application. Just want to speak a little bit about federal work study. This is a fantastic option if students would like to work while they're in school. It's wonderful for a couple of reasons. You will be working on campus, so you do not have to travel far. Because you're working for the actual institution, they will have a cap on how many hours a week you can work. So often they'll say you can do 20, 25 hours max. Whereas if you were, working at McDonald's, they might schedule you for 40 hours. Finally, they do expect you to be studying. So if they don't have any tasks for you to complete, they'll expect you to sit there and kind of work on your homework. And they're going to work with you for your exam schedule, your class schedule, where it might be kind of challenging in a different situation. The final and true benefit of it is that this is income that would not necessarily count on your FAFSA. So if you are a student and you're working at McDonald's, you would report that income on your next year's FAFSA. If you're a work-study student, they're just kind of like, oh, that's great, you did that. That doesn't count as really true income for a student on your FAFSA. So that's the true benefit of work-study. Okay, looking at student loans, again, the way you access student loans is going to be through the financial aid application, and we'll talk through some more details about how that application actually looks this year. It's important to identify the interest rates each year. So currently our interest rates are a little bit higher than they've been in past years. We're looking at kind of a 6.5% for the student, and then if parents want to do a Parent Plus loan, it's just over 9%. Those are fixed for the lifetime of the loan. And the benefit, however, is that while a student is in school, they do not have to make any payments on the loans. And they typically have a 6-month grace period. So 6 months after you graduate or stop attending, then you make your first student loan payment. The Parent Plus loan, you can have a similar option. They will initiate payment immediately, but you can request forbearance until your student is out of school. Very different than if you utilize a private loan, they would want payment immediately. So private loans are definitely an option, and happy to talk through different ways to do that. Sometimes you can find a much better interest rate. Other times that interest rate is not guaranteed to be fixed. So we can also talk through all those different options if they work for you. Just a couple tips on scholarships before we really dive into the FAFSA application. And I know I'm speaking very quickly and giving you a lot of information. I just want to make sure we get through all of it before we get to questions. But for scholarships, think specific, think local, and think easy. What I mean by that is, so if you are deciding that you want to major in a specific field, there may be a scholarship for it. So for example, there are many scholarship opportunities for women if they want to go into a STEM field. So something that specific. Similarly, local is your best bet. So if, for example, you have a family member that's in a union, often those unions have scholarships for students. So anything that is directly related to you and something that's around you. Often civic organizations have scholarships. College Now, for example, we have scholarships that will follow students to their schools. Anything that relates to employment or your school around you, great place to look. And the final tip, think easy. And often what that means is think of the scholarships that are about $500 and they're like a 500-word essay. If you did 10 of them and you got 8 of them, that's a great amount of money. And we see many students not wanting to do ones that are kind of lower in the amount because they're like, well, $500, that's really not going to make a big difference. But if you are one of 3 people that apply and they wanted to award 15 people, that $500 scholarship might become a $2,000 scholarship just because not everybody applied. So, keep your mind open when you're applying for scholarships. Okay, the FAFSA. So everything I've talked about, the grants, loans, scholarships, the way you access that is through the FAFSA. And so this is the free application for federal student aid that is managed by the Department of Education. And you do need to complete it to kind of unlock all of this federal aid. So essentially, what do we need? It will also create the SAI, which is called your Student Aid Index, and that's your financial metric of this is the financial story of your family, and that directly connects to if you're eligible for certain grants, if you're determined need-based or merit-based for some of the future scholarships, but that's kind of the number that you're looking for at the very end. You will use it or you will need to complete it every year that you are in a program. So you're completing it this year for your first year in your program. Next year, when you're a freshman and you're going to become a sophomore, you'll need to complete it again. So a lot of different things have happened over the last year and a half to make this FAFSA application easier and better. So now it is called the Better FAFSA. So if you've done a FAFSA in the past with another student or a sibling, it's going to look different. So some of the biggest differences that it no longer considers the number of individuals in college. So in the past, it did matter if you and your sibling were in school, you'd list both of yourselves. That question is no longer listed. So if you've never done a FAFSA, that doesn't matter. But if you have done that in the past, that is a pretty big change. The beta application is currently open. So many of you have probably heard that they were aiming for a December 1st launch, and that, you know, there are different institutions participating in this kind of beta application. The beta application opened. So far it is going really well. We are, however, recommending that unless you really need to do it now, you should still wait until December 1st once the beta has officially closed and all the kinks have been worked out. But that is your decision. In general, it is a lot easier, a lot shorter. So it used to be over 100 questions. Now it's about 36. So it's a smart application. It has a totally new look and feel. There's all kinds of videos. So if you have a question about something they're asking, you can watch a video about it. So it's a pretty helpful, pretty simple application. But the biggest change is that it is a role-based form now. So what that means is essentially the student will log in first, complete their section. They will invite the contributor, which is a parent or guardian, and say, hey, I'd like you to become a contributor on my FAFSA. They will then submit their part of the form. So then the parent or guardian got that invite in their email. They'll have to go into their email, click on that link, and then begin their part of the form. So then the parent or guardian will go in, complete their part of the form, and then hit submit, and that's when the FAFSA is complete. And we'll talk more about who needs to do what on the FAFSA as well. But what that also means is that the student will only see the student portion, and the parent or guardian will only see the parent-guardian portion unless you're sitting next to each other working on the form together, right? The information is meant to be private. And then the FSA ID is required for the student. So that's essentially kind of the username and password you've created to access this form. The student has to have an FSA ID, and then parent or guardian has to have an FSA ID. And depending on your current marital situation, you may need to have both parents have one, and we'll talk through that in just a second as well. Okay, so you do need to have your FSA ID created prior to starting your FAFSA form. Now, another one of the wonderful changes on the FAFSA is that it will automatically connect your income information from the IRS. So we are going to tell you the things that you need to have on hand to complete the FAFSA. Probably about half of it you won't use, but you need to have it just in case there's a particular question or difference in what is your current situation from prior tax years. But so I already went over the FSA ID for student and parent. You do need to have tax information for student and parent, as well as asset information, so value in your savings and checking, if you have any investments. For, you know, it would exclude all retirement investments, so if there's something like an UTMA or UGMA that you have for your student. 529 plans are unique, and depending on whose name they're in, if it's reported for the parent or the student. In general, it's much better to have the 529 listed under a parent asset than a student asset. So if you have both individuals on the account, it is appropriate to list it as a parent asset and is much more beneficial for the first year of the FAFSA filing. And then if you have a farm or a business, you would report the net worth of that. Another common kind of asset piece of information is if you have any rental properties, you do have to report the value of your rental properties. If you have paid any child support or received any child support the last year, that would be included as well as any federal benefits received. And then the student does need to have their list of colleges ready on hand because you add all of them in that form. Okay, so then the general process, and we'll kind of go more in detail for each of these steps. You're going to get your FSA ID. I can't emphasize that enough. So even if you wait until December 1 to complete the form, you could go home and get your FSA IDs done now. That is very important. But then you will actually start the form from the student's perspective. So we learned a lot last year. This is going to be the most effective way to get this form completed and avoid the most glitches, because there were a couple glitches last year. So this is definitely the best way to complete the form. Students start it, invite the contributor, and then they're going to also complete and submit their section. Then, once the contributors have accepted that invitation, they're going to complete their section. Okay, and that's really the whole form. Once you have submitted everything and it has processed, you will get your SAI, your Student Aid Index, and that is the number that the colleges and universities are going to utilize to create your financial aid award letter. So that's the number that then will say you are eligible for this much in grant dollars. If they have any institutional scholarships, sometimes it's initiating there, but you can utilize that information for your scholarship applications. And then you can also determine if you'd like to accept or reject any of the student loans that are offered to you. And finally, one of the most important reasons why you want to make sure you have your list of colleges ready and on the form and submitted is because every school that is on that list that you get accepted to will generate a financial aid award letter for you. So then you can sit down and say, okay, out of these 5 schools, this school has provided the best financial aid package. So we strongly recommend that you look at all of the award letters and compare and contrast what aid is being offered to you. Okay, so a little bit more about your FSA ID. Like I said, you will be completing the FAFSA every single year that you are in a program. So if you're doing a 4-year program, at minimum 4 years. If you decide to go on a graduate program, that FSA ID is the exact same. So it is something that you definitely need to make sure that you remember and can access. So if you have a personal email over a school email, we strongly recommend you using that for the students in the room, because if you don't remember your school password or username or email address, or if you don't have access once you graduate, that's going to become an issue and you'll be locked out of your account. Same thing with your phone number. So as long as you have that ID, if you know you're going to change your phone number, make sure that you actually actively change it before you don't have access to that other number. Similarly, you will be required to answer or create and answer security questions. We do recommend that you write down the answers to your security questions. Don't write down the questions and the answers, just write down the answers. They are case sensitive, and if for some reason you don't have access to your phone or your email, it's going to be the only way that you will be able to recover that FSA ID, username and password. Screenshot of what the actual website looks like. We think screenshots are very important because unfortunately there are a couple websites out there that are scam websites. So if you did FAFSA.com, that is actually a website that will help you figure out how to do the FAFSA and then charge you $80 to submit it. So this is a free form. Make sure you always type .gov and make sure what you see is it always has blue buttons. So we always say green and blue means go. If you see something that's yellow and orange, that's typically the scam FAFSA site. So in terms of student information, what goes on the FAFSA? The financial information, so a W-2 if you worked, even if you did not file your taxes, they will want you to enter that information. Money in your savings account, and then you can list up to 20 colleges. That was another addition. We used to be only 10, but now you can add 20. That would be a lot if you're applying to 20, but more power to you. And then who will be your contributors? So the student must know parent, guardian, email address, and it must be correct. Okay, so students, I cannot emphasize that enough. If you put it in incorrectly, that will delay your process. So please put it in correctly. So once a student invites their contributor, then they're actually going to look at the whole financial picture. So a little bit about contributors. Hopefully you can see that because the yellow is kind of hard to read. But so married parents who live together and file taxes together, only one parent needs an FSA ID. Okay. So then as a family, decide who that one parent is. So that's whoever the parent who has the FSA ID, that's the person you list, and that's the email you list as the contributor. Now, if you have parents who are living together and they're married, but they file separately, so married filing separately, then both parents will need an FSA ID, and both parents will need to be added as a contributor, okay? Because then they'll both have to verify their tax information separately. And then similarly, if you have parents not living together, you would determine which parent provides the most financial support, and that's the parent that you would list as your contributor. So then you would just list one. So those are kind of the three very common scenarios that we see, a lot of questions that we get. It can be much more nuanced than that. We completely understand. So if you have any questions about who might be a parent or guardian on the FAFSA, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask. If you are a parent who is remarried and there is a step parent in the household, that step parent will be a contributor as well. So that person would also be on the FAFSA. So you would have two. And really the point of this kind of separate student and parent guardian section is that they really want parents and guardians to verify their information as well as consent that they're a willing participant in this kind of financial analysis for the family. Yeah. And then I just want to emphasize what are not contributors, because we get a lot of questions about this as well. So if there is a widowed step parent or a widowed parent, they should not be added as a contributor. Grandparents who have not, legally adopted a student. Same thing with foster parents. Someone who is in legal guardianship rather than like the official kind of adoptive paperwork. And then brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, etc. Right? So it has to be your legal guardian from a court perspective, whether it's a biological parent or someone who has officially adopted you. And we recognize that while they may support you financially, that's the rules of FAFSA. Okay. So if a student does not have a legal guardian or does not have, well, there are many situations where a student could be considered independent and we would not include a contributor on the FAFSA. I've listed some of them up here. If they are married, which if you're married in high school, that would make you an independent student. If you have children that you care for and spend, over half of their financial well-being, take care of over half of their financial well-being, technically unaccompanied or homeless. And then if by the age of 13, you were either in the foster care system or both of your parents were deceased. So if there's any questions about whether a student is independent or not, also happy to answer those. Okay, moving right along. Let me see how I'm on time. So once you have submitted your FAFSA, you'll receive your SAI, kind of just emphasizing this again. This is what's going to determine your Pell Grant eligibility, access to the other grants, but then this is what is sent directly to the colleges to create your financial aid award letter. I'm going to skip this one. So the award letter is only sent to you by colleges that you have been accepted to. So if you list 20 and you're accepted to 10, you're only going to receive 10 financial aid award letters. This is kind of an example of what one of the financial aid award letters is looking like. It's important to note not all of them look the same. They will all look different. And so as you're kind of navigating and reading them, they're all going to have different line items, and it'll be a little bit of a treasure hunt to understand where the Pell, where the loan, where the scholarships are in each one. So take your time. We recommend making a spreadsheet that kind of identifies the prices of each one. If you want a template, we have one. We can email it to you so you can explore. It's very great. But once you have completed your your FAFSA, there's three steps that can happen. One, the federal government might say, hey, we'd like you to verify all of your financial information. Here's a separate set of paperwork that I need you to complete. They're legally required for compliance purposes to select a certain amount of their incoming freshmen, their sophomores, juniors, seniors, etc. for verification. It's just kind of a random selection of individuals that they take a deeper look at. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong, just a secondary step that you randomly got selected to complete. Failure to complete that paperwork will delay financial aid award letters. Okay. If you're looking at many of the private institutions will require a CSS profile, which if you are applying to a private institution, I would strongly recommend doing it because they take a deeper financial look and they will ask, for additional, payments on mortgages and things like that that the FAFSA doesn't ask for. So it does a much deeper financial picture, and they do it in case they have additional institutional aid to provide their students. And then finally, special circumstances. This is one that is really important to note because you are looking at prior tax years, recognizing that the situation that you had 2 years ago may not be the situation now, and you may need to tell the school about that special circumstance. So I'm just going to kind of skip ahead and do special circumstances since we're a little bit slow on time or short on time. But these are 6 of the most common special circumstances. So if one of these 6 apply to you, or there may be another additional one that's not listed up here, this would be a conversation that you would have directly with your financial aid office to make sure that they know it and they can take that into consideration and adjust your aid. So for example, if there was any sort of job layoff or reduction in hours, especially for the parent or guardian, if there was any sort of rental income or alimony differences that are from 2 years ago to now that are gone, any large medical, dental bills that your family is obligated to pay, any critical illness, divorce or separation, and then death in the family. Those are all considered special circumstances. And the process for this would be you would complete your FAFSA, you would complete your CSS profile, you would essentially narrow it down to, we would say we recommend probably 2 to 3 schools that you're looking at, and you would notify them of your special circumstance. It would be a lot of work to notify 20 schools of a special circumstance. They all have different paperwork and different processes, so you would have that conversation with the schools that you're really considering as you kind of move forward in this process. Okay, I'm going to leave this up here. So like I mentioned, everything that we do is free of charge. We will actually sit with you and work through the whole FAFSA application with you. We can talk about anything and everything college access. So if you would like to make an appointment with us, we would probably do a virtual one because we have offices located in downtown Cleveland and downtown Akron. But we do virtual offerings. So that would probably be the easiest based off location.